And, all right, we are live. Cool. So everyone who's joining us right now, which looks like 0, but hey, yay, 0. To everyone joining us or about to join us, stick around. We're going to get started at 10 o'clock sharp. We're going to get everyone else in the room. And so feel free to stare at me as I set things up, or if you have questions, you post into the live chat. We can see what we can do to get any questions answered before the festivities begin. All right, let's see what we got left. This new camera, I like it. It looks nice. The controls are not great. And then the other problem is, the other reason I got it was I'm supposed to be able to put like magical backgrounds behind me. And the only magical background I wanted was to be able to kind of blur the background. Because this thing's got like the whole 3D scanning stuff. But apparently I can't get that software to work. And it's definitely not about not supported. I am working off my new computer. So I can actually now do this live stream and debug code over there. So if I look sad at one point, it's because I have a bug.
Is it a USB camera? Is that what it is, or?
It is USB, but it's like USB-C. Like it does. The camera's supposed to support up to like 4K live streaming.
Oh wow.
Which is so weird because now I can see every individual hair on my head. Like it's a level of detail that's weird. I don't even have a 4K monitor, but that shows how bad the stuff was before. Let's see. Where is the email I need to send? Oh yeah. There it is. Mm-hmm. All right, now I've sent everything. My son's got this cold, and now I have this cough that I cannot shake.
Yeah, there was something going around for a while with a cough that everybody in my household had.
First, because he had just turned 3, I thought it was, like they give him all the shots and stuff.
Yeah.
I thought he had just gotten that, so I wasn't really concerned, and I was like, whatever, he's got he had like a slight fever one day, that kind of thing. But it turned out it was a real cold.
No.
A bummer.
Yeah.
And it's hitting me the worst today. I'm fine as long as I don't talk. So as long as I don't have to do any talking.
Yeah, well, that's
fine.
Good thing it's today.
Yeah, it's that one feature I wanted. I wanted to be able to kind of change the background, and I can't get it. I can make it look where everything turns green, but kind of defeats the purpose because then you don't see anything.
Okay. Well, can you put that through like some type of Google Hangout filter? I guess, well, if it's green, then you just have to put like some other thing.
Green, but I'm not even there. It just puts a green rectangle, and I'm just like, well, that's pointless. I don't know. I'll try it one more time. One more time. I'll just be sad. Because my upgrade cycle seems to be about 6 to 10 years per upgrade, so this stuff's got to last. Yeah, I just got the new computer also. It's awesome.
Right, I was like,
man, technology changed a lot since the last one. I've been learning about this whole NVMe. Have you seen these NVMe drives?
No, what is that?
They are the size of, like those rectangular sticks of gum?
Uh-huh.
They're SSDs, but they look like a stick of gum.
Oh, wow.
And you put them in like this vertical slot.
So it's like a Sony memory stick?
Yeah, actually, yeah. Those old memory sticks.
I just, whenever I think of like pieces of gum now, I think of Sony memory sticks for some reason.
Yeah, it's like that. You put it on the inside of the computer, but it works at about 10x the speed of an SSD.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So I was already happy with my SSDs, but one of the bottlenecks I had when I was doing a lot of the work, especially when the tests were running, was there was a lot of disk access because I had to copy whole like giant directories and process it, then delete them. So now I can copy like a 2 gig directory in about 60 seconds or less.
Crazy.
Oh, it's awesome to see.
I guess I feel like I'm constantly having to push the limits of what I believe is true because, like, for a while I had some type of misconception that Google Drive couldn't accept like multi-gigabyte files, but now that I think about it, it seems ridiculous that I would even be concerned about that.
Handle it. I hope you have a good internet connection, though.
Well, yeah. I mean, that was the thing, is that we've been doing a lot of video recordings for research recently, and so there's one thing where we did basically usability in VR, and so I had to capture like 3 streams of video and then cut it together, and one of them was GoPro, which is just like super bad as far as, well, it's not bad, but it's like high quality, right? Even when I put it down to like 720p, and so it was like per video 10 gigs of different video files that I had to cut together.
Yeah, no, all the videos I do and all the edits are on Google Drive.
Yeah.
Like the master edit files I store in the Creative Cloud stuff. It's easier that way. I can move my settings between computers more easily. But yeah, Google Drive does it. It's just when when you have a flaky connection, sometimes some of those files can take a little while to get uploaded, or a few days.
Yeah, I haven't had that problem, but I mean, that's what I guess I was concerned about, is I thought there was a certain point I tried to upload a GoPro file to Google Drive and it said it wasn't allowing files over X size, but I guess
I wouldn't be surprised if they had that limit at some point and then they got rid of it. But yeah. And my colors, the color for me is weird. That's why I was playing with the color too.
You should think about maybe like the lights.
I've actually gotten a lot of sun. You can't tell from this. I don't know what the heck. Hello, other people.
I'm going to turn off my AC just to make sure the sound's okay.
All right. I'm going to turn mine so I don't start sweating. Go higher. All right, I'm going to get a backup drink. I'll be right back. All right, I got my 3 beverage choices. Oh, jeez. Not spooky. Now we need like scary music.
Those filters are sweet.
I wish they actually did what I thought they should do. What is this one? Well, let's try that.
Yeah. I like the first one that you were using.
I just can't. Let's do auto. I feel washed out. I feel like this white film.
I think it does a little smoothing.
Blue. This is when I get sad. Now I'm angry. I don't know. Can't get the colors the way I want. Hello? What? I should just do this the whole time and see if anything. So much promise. And this button doesn't do anything. Oh, technology. I just like that I now have a 12-core computer with hyper-threading. That is some fun stuff to watch.
Now you can train those cat versus dog image classifiers even faster.
Which is really what you need if you're working on road mapping software.
What everybody does in machine learning now, it's all it is cat versus dogs classification.
Oh boy. Just for doing normal work on the computer while other stuff is going, it's such a better thing. All right, we're gonna get going in just a second. Just to kind of orient everyone in the room, remember everybody who seems to have turned your cameras off right now, please turn them back on. I see Hannah, I see Chris, I see Andrew. If anyone's ever seen Romper Room, that's what I'm simulating right now. I don't see Alan.
I saw him on a second ago, maybe.
I know. Just a reminder, everyone leave your video on, leave yourself muted. You should all have a link to the magical live chat, which I also happen to have on one of my many monitors. When you guys do post questions, which please do throughout Chris's talk today, prefix them with MM. I don't know what it means, but if I see MM, that's how I know it's you and you're in the room. Don't use any of the goofy Google Hangouts apps during the broadcast because it does bad and evil things. And to the mentor who's giving his chat, Chris and others, ignore the chat, ignore anything that pops up on your window throughout. Sometimes I send secret messages that you can see. Just ignore those. And that is that. Hey, Chris, you're still director of AI at Philosophy Group?
Yep, that's right.
Excellent. All right. Since Andrew's coming up a little bit later, Andrew, you still product manager at Vega Factor?
Yep.
All right. Cool. Man, this cough is rough. I hope I make it.
Part of my pre-talk ritual now is to have a cough drop right before we start.
Oh, now you've mentioned cough drop. That's what I should have done. Joni, remember, keep yourself muted, but also keep the video on until I call, and you'll unmute yourself when I call on you. Thank you very much. Alan, keep your video on. What happened? Chaos. All right, everyone, we're going to get started right now, and hopefully all my new fancy technology over here keeps working or stays working. Matthew, remember, keep yourself muted, video on. Video on. There you go. All right, folks, we're going to get started now. Nope, I'm taking that back. We're going to get started in just another second. All right. I'm good now. It's Sunday, August 12th, 2018, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today, we're joined by one of our mentors, Chris Butler, Director of AI at Philosophy Group, and he's going to be leading a talk on adversarial models in product. Let me just briefly explain the format for those of you who might be joining us for the first time today. Chris is a mentor in the Product Mentor program. The Product Mentor is a program that helps pair up mentors and mentees from all around the world. We're in over 20 different countries at various different times. We've been going on for over 5 years. What we have in the room are mentors and mentees from the current session of the Product Mentor. We also open it up to everybody, so always feel free to keep posting your questions throughout the talk so that we can then pass them on to Chris in fairly real time. So let's just very quickly, we'll just go quickly around the room with introductions. I'll tell everyone a little bit more, and then we'll get started. Let me start with the person closest to me, and that is Matthew. Matthew, tell us a little bit about yourself. Are you a mentor or a mentee, and where are you?
Sure. So I'm a mentee in the Product Mentor program in the suburbs of New York right now, and I'm matched up with Sud Kaushik. And I'm working on hotel property management software.
Excellent. And let's go to Joni.
Hi, everybody. This is Joni Hoadley. I'm based in Santa Barbara, although I'm currently in Mammoth, California on vacation. I'm a software product management consultant and coach, and I have spent the last 20 years working for companies that are kind of at the intersection of music and technology. And I am a mentor, and I'm working with Marzia. Excellent.
And let's go to Hannah.
Hey everyone, my name is Hannah and I work in financial services. I'm in New York City and my mentor is Patrick Hoffman.
Excellent. And to Chris.
Yeah, I'm Chris Butler, Director of AI at PHILOSOPHIE, which is a design consultancy firm. And I do a lot of design research and prototyping. My background is a bunch of different product places. Yeah, I'm a mentor for Alan and Daphne this season.
Excellent. Andrew.
I'm Andrew Chu, been a product manager for about 7 years, based in New York now. I've worked on B2B and B2C kind of fintech projects. And right now I'm a product manager at Vega Factor, focused on helping other organizations build higher performing cultures.
And over to Alan.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alin, located in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. Currently, product manager working at Modus Create company, and my mentor is Chris. Thanks for that, and happy to be here.
Excellent. And I am Jeremy Horn, aka the product guy. I'll be moderating here today for you. So for those of you who are joining us either through YouTube or if you can go, you also can go over to theproductmentor.com/live. And if there's video on the top, if you scroll down, you'll see a chat box, and you can always post in questions and comments. Things that are topically related, I'll get to Chris in fairly real time. I usually wait for a good moment to interrupt him. But things that are more generic, what is product management? Why are we all here? Those types of questions I will still hand off to Chris, but I will wait with the more generic ones until the end of the talk. But with all of that said, I think it's time for us to start the talk. We'll let Chris take it away on adversarial models and product. Chris, over to you.
Great. Thank you. So yeah, like I said, I'm Chris Butler, and I'm going to be talking about adversarial product management. And you may be asking, what is adversarial product management? I'll get into that in a moment. But before I do, oh, and by the way, all of the resources are available at this particular link, and I'll have that again at the end of the talk. So I'm Chris Butler, Director of AI. I've been a mentor with the Product Mentor for 5 seasons now, and I have over 18 years of product and business development experience. And I definitely think that product and BD, there's a lot of overlap. I think my first mentor talk was actually about the similarities between those two roles, but I really think they're kindred spirits, so you should check that out. I've been at places like Microsoft, Waze, Kayak. I started my own company that was in the restaurant management space, and have worked a lot of other places as well. But right now, working mostly as a design consultant, helping both large and small companies figure out really early stage stuff. This is my email address and my Twitter handle if you want to say nice things about me on the internet. But let's first start with really quickly that PHILOSOPHIE, as I was saying, we help really small companies and very large companies start to experiment and understand maybe the problem space. And we do a lot of that through prototyping, research. And one of the things, we actually have a list of values that all philosophers believe. And they're, oddly enough, called the Philosopher's Stones. And the 5th one that I want to talk about really briefly is make it better, which is about this idea of constant incrementalism towards something better that you're doing. It could be the processes that you're using. It could be the actual work that you're outputting. It could be a product that you're building. And the reason why I think this is really related to adversarial is that a lot of the issues that we have today, I think, as product people and as product teams are really about biases. And these biases, there's a lot of different ones. There's actually a whole list on Wikipedia that you can check out. But these biases actually keep us constrained in ways that are maybe not ideal. So like naive realism means that we believe everybody else thinks the way that we do. Attentional bias is that whatever we're focused on the most is what we actually believe to be best most of the time. Confirmation bias, availability heuristic. The worst one is probably bias blind spots, which is that we're blind to our actual biases. And all of these things, while constraints can be good in some ways when it comes to creative work, they actually hurt us in other ways. And so this talk is really meant to talk about 3 ways that I've found to remove constraints that are all related to adversarial thinking. And the first one is red teaming. The second one is feedback loops. And then the last one is randomness. And so all these things are meant to, in some way, go against these biases or these constraint sets or worldviews that we have as product people. And I'll also talk about particular examples and how you can use this on a day-to-day basis for your product management. So red teaming. If people are not familiar with red teaming, it really started back, I think the first time that red team was used as a term was back in the 1960s. And this was to describe the blue team versus the red team, which was the US versus Russia, or the USSR. And what red teaming really is, when we talk about it from a military standpoint, is this idea of some type of, in this case, this is the Marine Corps Op 4, which is the oppositional force. And they basically play the bad guys. So there's a team that exists in a bunch of different military, US militaries as well as worldwide militaries, that learn about and practice what their adversaries do. And so probably, a very famous example of this is during Top Gun, when they're at the training facility and they're being attacked by someone that is pretending to be basically a Russian MiG that's played by one of the instructors. And so this is an example of what would be called an oppositional force. So this is something that is done militarily all the time. We tend to do a little bit less of this, I think, when we're working on product. And so there's a couple online resources around red teaming. And in particular, Red Team Journal is talking about red teaming from the standpoint of what we would coin as cybersecurity or InfoSec. But basically, the practice of viewing a problem from an adversary's or a competitor's perspective is really what red teaming is. There's some other constraints as well that I would put on red teaming in the sense that it should be a separate team. Generally, they are not given rules to abide by, right? So they're supposed to act like an adversary actually would. And the biggest issue around this is that it attacks our assumptions about the world, right? So we have a bunch of assumptions or worldviews or mindsets that we're constantly using. And these could be just assumptions though, right? Like when we talk about the OODA loop from John Boyd, observe, orient, decide, act, one of the most important steps there is really around orientation in how your understanding the world is different from the way the world actually is. And the redteams.net, which is basically a red team consultancy, they have a list of rules, and one of the ones that I like the most is really assumption is the mother of all F-ups. And so anytime that you do make a lot of assumptions and you're not checking them constantly, you will build things that people don't care about. So when we talk about product red teaming, what's most interesting to me, I've written about kind of competitive analysis before, and I think a lot of competitive analysis falls flat because it's thinking about it from the standpoint of what features are there that I have versus what my competitor has. But one of the most important aspects, especially from that redteam.net group, was really around recon. And so this idea of recon is how do you learn about the way that your adversaries or your competitors actually think, the way that they practice, why they do things, what types of processes do they use, what types of tools do they use? And what Red Team refers to this as is really open source intelligence. And so if you go on Medium and you look for people that work for this company, there's probably lots of them today that are in product that are writing Medium articles. And so this is just an example of that. Say I was working for Lyft, I would look up things about Uber. And if I was working at Uber, I'd look up things about Lyft. And so everything that people are talking about really ends up being the things that they care about. They'll talk about processes that they use on a regular basis. This is true about Twitter. This is true about even Facebook or LinkedIn. So that idea of like really understanding how your adversaries would think in the first place is really important. The next thing is what we'll call role-playing or wargaming or scenario play. And so this is essentially where once you understand how your adversary may act, you can then set up certain situations where you would pretend to be your adversary and take action. And so generally, when it comes to red teaming, this means that you're trying to basically compromise and extract data from, say, a data server, but doing that using all types of things, including not only just like tech, but also social engineering, physical engineering, etc. I use this picture as an example of role-playing because it's such a great video, and I'll link to it in my notes, but it's such a great video of this guy is pretending to be a customer for a website, and the woman is basically just reading what the web form is. And so when you look at the web form, you'd say, this isn't a great web form, but it's a web form that may work for this particular circumstance. But when you actually get into a role play scenario, you feel how hostile that web form actually is. So this idea of kind of creating scenarios that you role play where someone is meant to be your competitor, or even how your customer may act is really powerful. The next thing is what's referred to as dominant logic. And so this is a link to a management journal. But there's some good HBR articles that talk about this as well. And at Philosophy, we formed this into kind of an exercise to understand dominant logic. But really what dominant logic is that, again, those assumptions that you have about the way the world works, you list them out, and then you purposely take what would be the realistic opposite of them. And so if you believe that, say as Lyft, that the people will not want to jump on electric scooters, you would have to then understand maybe what would happen if people did want to jump on electric scooters, and maybe you'd have some of the issues that San Francisco as a city is having. but really the end point is that there's a lot of assumptions we make about our businesses or about our kind of competitive landscape that if you take the opposite, you'd be more surprised in how reasonable those opposites sound. And so using this as a way to gather a bunch of assumptions from the team, say through private ideation, and then taking the ones that you think are most true and taking the opposites of them are actually is a really incredible way to kind of look at that. And I've even done this when it comes to asking people to come up with bad ideas. And the thing that's funny is that you kind of get at this dominant logic in the sense that people think that bad ideas are just the opposite of good ideas. But sometimes, especially when you talk about strategic thinking is not about being worse in class versus best in class. It's about the idea of making a hard choice between two good options. And so a lot of the time, what we would consider bad is really just because of the assumptions we have about the way the world works. The next thing is really kind of proactive, creative, negative thinking. And this is what's referred to as a pre-mortem. This is an HBR article that really outlines it, but it's been referenced before that. But I do these for almost every project that I start. And so it's essentially getting everybody into the same room, having people prompted with the idea that they, in some way, at the end of this project, say 6 months from now, 12 months from now, a year, 2 years from now, they have screwed up this project so horribly that they do not want to work in the industry anymore. Everybody quits. They all go off into the wilderness and never come back, right? Like that's how bad this project just got screwed up. So with that mindset, let's think backwards now. Why did that happen, right? And so once you start to get at these common reasons why projects fail, once you start to understand the crowd and the way that they understand the way that projects fail, you really start to get at the heart of what could go wrong for this project. And so there are definitely some that will be very extreme, right, or very unlikely. But what I find every time I do this process is that the top 3 to 5 items were things that gave us excess friction or problems while we were running a project, and ends up giving us at least a little bit of forethought before we hit that problem. So that's red teaming, and those are some exercises that I've used to really think about red teaming. The next thing is really around this idea of feedback loops. And feedback loops are are something that we all talk about. We all talk about the idea of how do we get better at understanding the way that we are in comparison, we actually are in comparison to the way that we think. And there's a particular aspect from artificial intelligence that has been, I guess, been very interesting to me, and has made me think a lot about how do we do this better as product people. And it's generative adversarial nets or networks, which are often referred to as GANs within the machine learning community. But it's something that came out a couple years ago. Ian Goodfellow is really the main researcher, but there's definitely a lot of people that have been involved. But it's this idea, and getting a little bit technical for a second, it's about this idea that there's actually two machine learning algorithms that are going against each other. There's one, which is the generator in the blue in the bottom left. And so the job of the generator is to create some type of, say, fake image. And in this case, it's trying to create fake images of digits. And then there's a training set of what we consider to be the world truth. And then the other machine learning algorithm is called a discriminator. And that discriminator is trying to, based on some random selection of a fake image that's generated by the generator or a training set truth image, it's trying to decide whether it's real or fake. And the thing that's really interesting about this is that as you start to train the generator and the discriminator, you get two machine learning algorithms that do things really well. So one, a discriminator is basically a classifier for what's real or what's not, right? And that's very helpful in some cases for, say, fraud detection, things like that. But then the fake image, the generator part, starts to get really, really good at creating what looks like real information. And so in this case, you know, if I were to show you this set of 6 photos, you would think that these are maybe stars that you just don't know about. But they were actually generated by a generator of a GAN, a more recent one. And so they're starting to get better and better at actually just creating what it thinks a human being that is famous would look like when photographed. And so the reason why that this works so well is actually the fact that there are really, really tight feedback loops. And that as you keep on going epoch or after generation and generation of kind of testing, both sides are trying to do a better job against that. So you can really think of this almost as like two boxers sparring with each other, right? Like you would never pit someone that's very advanced at boxing with someone that's less advanced at boxing because and have the more advanced person go full bore because they would just get destroyed. And so what you're trying to always do, and this happens in chess with ELO ratings, this happens in matchmaking software when it comes to like online gaming, you're trying to find people that you don't know how well they'll actually do against each other, kind of like a discriminator would. And then you're trying to pit them against each other when it comes to getting better at what they're doing, ideally. And so, you know, I have a couple rules or thoughts on what makes feedback really good. And one of them is that it's very personalized, right? Like when we talk about having feedback, say through a one-on-one or through mentorship programs, it really having it personalized for the actual way that the person thinks or the struggles that they have as an individual is really important. And that's very much related to context and situation in the sense that, you know, certain types of tactics may work against certain adversaries, but may not work against others. And so how do you understand where you are in a process? How do you understand what is the actual end goal of this process this time, which could change, is very important. The fact that it's timely is always good. You know, the idea of, say, saving up feedback for an employee for a year and then giving it to them as a big chunk is not as helpful as small steering adjustments. And I think we can all say that's the same thing when it comes to product management within a team as well, is that kind of big bang releases, things like that don't work as well. And then it needs to be actionable. So the reason why we have feedback and the reason why we have dashboards, the reason why we have metrics, the reason why we do any of this stuff is because we now need to do something different in the future than what we were doing before. And so if feedback is not in some way converted into action, it's basically useless feedback. And so how do we accept feedback? So this is something that I think is probably very core to the way people understand feedback personally. So what I'm wanted to be very upfront with was I've gotten a lot of feedback on the writing that I've done. And so some of that has been pretty assaulting, right? So could do with more imagination, inspiration. Apparently I'm very pedantic and swear more than I need to occasionally. I'm all substance, no style. And then even for one topic that was trying to bridge the gap between technology people and designers or product people, please stop using hyped up topics like AI just as advertisements. So, you could imagine that when I first received any one of these pieces of feedback, I was upset in some way, right? I was not happy. It made me question why I was writing what I was writing. But the reason why is that is actually really good feedback. If it doesn't hurt, it's not good, right? And so this comes from a Medium poster that was talking a lot about feedback more recently, and it really struck a chord for me, not just emotionally, but from the standpoint of like, if we're just being told all the time that we're doing good, right? That can be helpful. That can give us confidence in some way, but it's not actually telling us what's bad. It's not having us question the assumptions. Again, that word assumptions is really key here about the way that our world works. And so this book was recommended to me by someone who used to work for me and someone I mentee named Adam Thomas. And so thanks for the feedback. I think is a really great book about this. There's a lot of things that they go into in this book about feedback. And part of it is about how do you give good feedback and how do you structure feedback, things like that. But the bulk of the book, and I think really the most important parts of the book, are really how do you accept feedback? Because there's no way that you can assume everybody in the world that is going to give you some type of feedback has actually read this book, or that they're willing to play by the rules by which good feedback actually is given. So because of that, what that means is that you need to prepare yourself for receiving feedback in a way that may not always be helpful or happy or whatever. And so the way that they think about it is really feedback triggers. And so while receiving feedback, there's 3 types of triggers that they talk about that will cause you to feel upset in some way, will cause you to ignore the feedback, will cause you to maybe even lash back out at the person that's giving you feedback. And so one of those triggers is really relationship triggers. So, either I have a belief about the way that the way that the feedback giver and I actually work together, and that could be positive or negative, and that in some way it's calling into question the way that the relationship is. And so being able to understand that better, will allow people to maybe not jump on and pile on bad relationships with feedback as much. The next thing is really around identity triggers. So how does this feedback really call into question everything I believe about myself? So that's why things that are very impactful feedback usually makes us question whether we're doing the right thing most of the time and whether we're actually going after what we believe we're going after. And sorry, I skipped one there. The last one is really truth triggers. So what is it about what we consider to be truth of the world, again, assumptions about the world, that is now being called into question? And what's most important about all these things is that we're taking a moment to just allow us to accept that feedback in some way, allow these triggers to happen and for them to pass, right? So it's not about, and probably the most key thing about this, thanks for the feedback book, is that it's more about the idea that you're accepting feedback, you're getting clarification, especially things like truth triggers. You're getting clarification in why the person believes that about the world, in difference to what yours is. And then it's your turn to then go, thank them, go off and think about the feedback itself, and whether you even want to accept that feedback, which is the last part that you're more than allowed to do. And so within product, there's 2 main ways that I think about adding feedback loops. And so one that I think is super important. I think this gets back to when we ask what the KPIs of a real product person is it's not so much how are they tying themselves to success metrics of the product itself? I mean, I think it's important that the entire team are tied to success metrics, right? But what you should be doing is you should be having one-on-ones with your team, people that you're not managing, but people that are just on your team. And it doesn't have to be a huge amount of time. It doesn't have to be, a very in-depth set of questions, but you want to get at do they understand what they're doing, why they're doing it? How does their work tie to the grand strategy that you're going after? And once I start to have a theory about which of my assumptions are wrong, and a very important task during that meeting is to ask people and prime them for particular feedback. Because I think if you ever go up to someone, you just say, hey, give me feedback, they'll be like, well, I don't know. I mean, they're trying to suss out whether you're hunting for just compliments. They're there's a lot of kind of mental machinery that tries to spin up how they believe what you're trying to do. And so being much more upfront about saying, like, I've heard from people that I X, and I wanted to get your thoughts. Do you think, what do you think about that? And again, not asking leading questions like, do you think that's bad or good, right? But just, what do you think? And I found that this is really, really effective at getting, especially when you need to triangulate that feedback that tends to be, cause you a lot of pain. Being able to rehash it with someone, you may realize that, one, it's not as bad as you think it is, or that maybe you're missing some context that is maybe not as bad as you think it could be. And so I found this question, especially when you're having kind of like casual conversation with people or having one-on-ones with people, just really saying like, I've heard X. What do you think about that? The next thing is what I'll call product manager critiques. And so I wrote a post about this, but I think it's really important that product people specifically get into more of a mindset that designers and developers have already. And so product manager critiques are really about this idea that, say you're a designer, you would usually have work that you're doing, you would put it up on a wall, people would look at it, consider it, and then they'd ask a lot of questions, right? Like, why did you consider this context? Is it accessible? Like, why did you choose this color, right? Because the truth is the person who's in the work actually knows the most about the work. And so just telling them what you think or telling them what to do is actually not as good a feedback as you could give. Same thing with developers when they do code reviews, right? Code reviews, some of the time, will break down to just, I have a preference in how this is architected. But a lot of time it's like, why did you choose to do this way, right? Like, what is the context that I don't have that you have? And I'd say, just as another example of where product critiques really come from is, I think that one of the things that product people maybe do a poor job of is whenever there are things that management will say or executives will say that just doesn't make sense, right? And what you should be using that moment for is to understand, why does that executive have a different context in the world than you do? And so all of those things have really inspired a practice that I've done, which is product manager critique. So this is getting all the product people into a room, ideally on a weekly or bi-weekly basis. You have everybody basically take 5 minutes to talk about an overview of the project, who the audience is for the thing that they want to have critiqued, which, again, for product people, we usually deal in communication, alignment, things like that. So this more often than not tends to be some type of document or a slide deck or even a prototype or just kind of like a model of some type. And so what is that audience expecting to get out of that model? And then where do you need help? And you present the model. And at that moment, I usually time box these things. So it's basically 5 minutes for that product person to just talk about it. And they're not there to sell things. They're not there to do anything other than just provide enough context so that for the next 5 minutes after that, they can sit there and shut up and then just mostly get questions from people, right? And so questions about, did they consider this? Did they try this? What about these things? Or why did you do this? And so definitely the product person should be answering those questions as time goes on. But it's less about them answering and more about them collecting alternate viewpoints or mindsets that are from the other product people. And so I find this is like a really great way for product people to not only give feedback to each other about the particular things they're working, but you start to get exposed to so many other ways that product people think and do things. And that to me is really the currency that product people trade in, right? Is all these mindsets or process or tools. It's really about how, like, when and how you use these tools or processes and when do you not. And so if you can in some way glean some knowledge from other people about that before you actually have to go through it, that's very, very helpful. And so that's feedback loops, right? So feedback loops are really not only for yourself, but for your team. How are you providing ways for people to give kind of very raw and honest feedback, but also feedback that is more helpful from the standpoint of questioning and trying to understand than just assaulting people. But that does mean, though, that if you feel like you are upset in some way about feedback you're getting or questions you're getting, that might be a good point for you to consider what is about that is triggering you and how can you get past that. The next thing is randomness. And so randomness is something that I really love a lot. And I think in the end, what it really comes down to is that I think that people believe that their choices are a lot more meaningful than they are. And not only that, but that when we are constraining ourselves with these biases, when we're not kind of testing our assumptions constantly, we're really constraining ourselves in the way that we're doing, say, explore versus exploit. And let me talk about that in just a second. So this is another great book, Why Greatness Cannot Be Planned. It's a little bit more of a machine learning focused book. But as you can see by the subtitle, The Myth of the Objective, it's really trying to ask the question, when we have a very far-reaching objective, right, is it actually helpful to the discovery process of that objective? And let's take an example that they use in the book, which I feel like is a little bit too much of a straw man sometimes, but I think it illustrates the point. But when people first invented vacuum tubes, say back in the 1800s, and I think that was when it was actually invented, they could never imagine that this would lead to supercomputers at some point. And the reason why was that they were not used for, they were not used for computing when they were first invented. And so, there was no way for them to say, I need some type of processing machine or calculator, and I'm going to do that by hunting for, solutions in the near term. And so another example would be evolution. Evolution is one of these processes that doesn't really have an outcome other than a very loose one of survival. And so from there, could we have ever imagined that a very small bacteria or microorganism could have developed eventually into being human is a really great question. And so the way that these authors talk about it is the idea of if you're at a lake and you need to get across, but it's foggy, and you can only see a couple steps ahead of you as far as stones, it doesn't make sense necessarily to use a compass, right? Like even if you have a very lofty goal, it doesn't help you to necessarily go towards the objective so much. What does help you to do is to search in a novel way through that solution space. And so one of the things that they did was they created this website where they used basically a genetic algorithm to automatically generate photos. And at first, the photos were really just a bunch of like circles, and it didn't mean anything. But they then included a voting system by humans to basically say which of these photos was more novel than others. And then they would, using genetic algorithms as a method by which you took this algorithm that generated, say, a photo, and then you bred it with other algorithms and then created a new population, and then you'd ask for fitness of those things. And so you did this many, many, many generations, and you started to get things that actually look like a beach or a skull or a butterfly or a person. Now, if someone had tried to go into the system and use the actual algorithms and setting their parameters to get to a human face, it would have taken a very, very long time. And it would have taken a lot of trial and error. And it probably would have taken longer than it did to just develop this based on novelty. And so that's really interesting to me. And the reason why that's interesting to me is that, again, those constraints we have are really about, we think that there's a particular way to get the objective. But if things like dominant logic, assumptions, red teaming has like taught us, right, is that a lot of the time, a little bit of randomness injected into a process actually helps you avoid tells over constraints within certain systems. And this is another good example is around poker players, right? So poker players, one of the biggest issues that they face is other people detecting their bluff. And so one way that people will help avoid detection of bluffs is by using a watch face. And if the second hand is in the upper corner or the upper side or the lower side, they'll either bluff or not. And so this is random enough during the game of poker that if they just follow this, they will look more random than they would have otherwise when they were meaning to bluff, for example. And so, again, I think there's a lot here about randomness. And so within the product world, I think there's a couple.
Before you jump into that next part, we have a question that just came in. Actually, two questions. First one is from M, I'm going to say. How do you deal with people who are unwilling to receive feedback but are on your team developing products and have been assigned by an area manager? Sounds like there's something very specific. Well,
I mean, I don't mean to be talking about that person, Joe, whoever they are. We'll just, no, I'm just kidding. I think that's a really tough question because I think we're starting to get into the range of like organizational issues in that case, because I guess the way that we do things at Philosophy and the way that I really believe is that, and actually this is something I discovered through kind kind of researching more about red teaming, but this idea of red teams is that they need to be very small. And the reason why is that you need to have trust between your team members, and each team member has some type of expertise that they're given or has, and they have a decision-making authority over that expertise. And so what I would ask in response to that question would be something along the lines of, well, is it their decision-making authority to make that decision that you disagree with, right? And if that's the case, then you kind of just need to disagree and commit, as Jeff Bezos would say, right? Like that's the problem with feedback, is that people are allowed to also not take it. Now, it doesn't mean that that person is a good person to work with. It doesn't mean that you shouldn't escalate if you feel like it's an issue. But the truth is that if they're making a decision, the first thing I would try to do is try to understand why they're making that decision, right? The second thing I would try to understand is it their decision to make? And so anyways, those are the things I would try to think about when dealing with that type of situation.
Cool. And the next question, I'm going to go over to Matthew. Matthew?
Sure. So my question is there a good strategy for handling feedback from a leadership figure where both you and others on the team have kind of noticed a trend where the feedback sometimes is a little bit more grounded in pressure from leadership above him rather than reality on the ground, reality of what the engineers are working on, reality of what's achievable or accomplishable?
Yeah. I mean, I think this is the biggest disconnect that happens with that is really around strategy a lot of the time, because you have a strategy at the very top of the executive team that does not find a linkage to the day-to-day activities, right? And I think this gets to maybe agile mindsets, right? Or I guess like lean technically, but it's that the idea that the team that is actually working on things, they have the most context. And so it sounds like there is some issue where, one, feedback is not being accepted back from the teams that are at the line, right? Like that's why like not listening to customer support is usually a bad idea, because they know what everybody's complaining about, right? And so I think that's one of those issues. But the other issue is that probably there's not hard discussions happening about the alignment between high-level strategy and day-to-day action. And it could be your manager that is the break in that link, but it could also just be the managers above don't have a good linkage to below. And so again, I mean, there's no, it's very rarely that people do things for nefarious reasons, right? Generally, we're all stuck in contexts that we have, we have ability to get out of those contexts, but unfortunately, some of the time, the ability to get out of that context is just quitting, right? And so anyways, I think those are some interesting things to think about. Like, is feedback getting from day to day, like people on the line up to those executives in some way? Maybe that's an issue. But the other one could be too, is that they're not realigning strategy based on the reality of the world, right? And that's where, when I reference like John Boyd's OODA loop, right, that orient step is the key aspect of that, is that everybody's wrong in some way about the way they view the world. It's just by how much, and how much can you fix that, right?
And next question comes from Hannah. Let me hand it over to you.
Sure. So I am often in this mindset where I know I have these biases, and I keep questioning them.
We all have them.
But I'm just curious, like, because I end up going down this rabbit hole, and I'm just curious, like, how do you know which biases to question and explore further, and which ones are helpful to keep around?
So you don't know, actually. That's the whole problem with the bias blind spot, is that, and actually maybe this is a good into kind of like the idea of randomness, right? Is that part of what I think is key is that, like, and this gets back to red teaming too, is that like we are caught up in our worldviews, right? And so one of the things that we do, like in getting back to the red teaming recon stuff, is that we do research, right? We talk to customers, we watch them use our products, we go out and like talk to other people, we talk to our teammates, you know what I mean? And so that is the best way, I think, to do it. Or that's one way, right? Like one way is just like, if you're not talking to customers, if you're not doing research, you're not doing that type of stuff, there's no reason for you to question what your assumptions are. Now, the issue is that you will still have biases that make you interpret the data certain ways over others, right? And this concept of, say, data-driven product is mostly BS, I think. And the reason why is that, like, it's not just about quantitative things, because quantitative things still need to be interpreted into human purpose, right? And this is a big issue for machine learning and AI, where it's called like the alignment problem, right? Like if you give a reinforcement learning algorithm something to do, especially like there's been some great examples in like Atari games that they're teaching reinforcement learning things to be, it will find a bug in the code to cheat to win, right? And so whenever you're, and this gets back to, I forget who exactly said it, but the idea of like once you measure something, that becomes the way that's the way people start exploiting that measurement, right? So that's why, like, to me, quantitative without qualitative and without strategy, right, without goal and purpose or meaning, ends up being very one-sided. And so that's the problem, is that even when you're quantitative, you can still fall into these biases. Now, the last way I would say that you can try to get out of this, besides just like constantly trying to be aware and open to talking to customers and researching, is randomness. And so the randomness is one of the best ways for you to not get into this hole of like only attacking certain biases versus others. So anyways, I'll talk about that in a second, but I think that's a very interesting way to deal with that.
Cool. So that's all the questions we have right now, but do keep them coming in. You can post them to the productmentor.com/live or go to the YouTube link in the chat, and I'll keep passing them along to Chris. With that said, Chris, back to you.
Great, thank you. So yeah, product randomization. So one of the things that I've done with product randomization is there's this great deck of cards called Oblique Strategies, and they're originally created by Brian Eno, who's been a music producer for a very long time, very interesting person, a designer as well. And he created this deck of cards whenever he was producing a record or helping some musicians put together music. They would hit this kind of like block where they couldn't get past things. And a lot of the reason why was that they were getting caught up in their own heads, right? And so he created this this particular deck of cards with a bunch of things. And they're ways to question the world. They're also just statements sometimes. So they're really weird. Sometimes they're just like courage or, you know, like, but they're things that make more sense, like remove the thing that is most important, right? Or play with different instruments, things like that. And so what I found, one way to utilize this type of randomness, and so you'll see here that I use a lot of things that come from gaming, because gaming usually applies randomness to things, is that this is what's called a crazy eight. And so a crazy eight is used a lot in design thinking circles to do ideation. And so in this case, I can't remember what the exact crazy eight was. It's something to do with the user interface. And this is my actual horrible writing. So sorry, you guys will be very hard for you to try to figure out what it's saying. But what the process of this is actually that you will take 8 minutes, and that for 1 minute for each frame, you will sketch an idea. And so it's super fast. Usually you want to start with like a how might we of some type. And what I've done to add randomness to this is that generally people come in to the exercise with a problem, like the how might we that we're trying to solve. They'll come in with their mindset and their background and their experience with the problem, and then maybe even like what was the last interface they used. And I take that and I join it with random oblique strategy cards that I draw per frame, draw from the deck, and then people will have to think about how would they now take whatever their current idea is and reinterpret it through the lens of one of these random cards. And so for this case, you start to get very, very broad ideas, right? And it's very key, I think, especially when you feel like you've hit a block of some type, that you explore. And that's really what the greatness cannot be planned people are talking about, is that sometimes novelty is the way out from, you know, kind of closed thinking. Now, it doesn't mean in any way that you should have, you know, the idea of no constraints whatsoever is really bad. And that's why we tend to constrain on a particular problem we're trying to solve for a particular person. But once you get past that, you know, assuming that it always has to be a particular type of web app, for example, is a bad constraint. So what if you use something different? Like what if it was only text messaging that was allowed? Or what if you had to do it via paper? This is also where one of these frames, usually if I don't have a deck of those cards with me, and you can get apps for this as well, I'll actually have people draw a bad idea as a way to get at maybe rethinking the way the problem is formulated. And we've actually taken this is a picture of some board games that we created where, again, we focused on from a design thinking standpoint, but divergence is really this activity of making very creative ideas or exploring a particular space. And so we created a board game, and this was swag for a particular conference, the Enterprise UX conference that's in San Francisco, not this year, but last year. And we included a dice. It's a board game, essentially, where you're going around, and as you're drawing, you know, that's why the timer is there. As you're drawing, you're considering these different things. like making it more sterile, make it more emotional, emphasize the best part, emphasize the worst part. These are all ways to get us out of these constricted ways that we think. And the other side of the board is actually around convergence and how do you start to whittle away which idea to go with. Another thing that's I've found really helpful is there's this type of card called trigger cards. And so they have a lot of different versions. I'm actually working right now on a set of trigger cards with the creator around artificial intelligence and machine learning. But it's this idea of like, there are a lot of things that you don't consider that, you could consider this a checklist, right? You could consider that this whole deck of cards of say 50 or 60 cards is just a checklist of everything that you should consider. But the problem is that you may overthink things then too, right? So using these more restricted ways of doing idea generation, and again, I always believe that idea generation should be done through private ideation first and then discussion rather than the other way around. You start to select randomly different things. And I've actually done this with, there's a software called Anki, which is like a flashcard software. And so I've loaded up a deck that has the oblique strategies, has well-known human biases, and then the listing of all known mental models that like Charles Munger cares about. And so by drawing a few of those cards, you start to like consider a lot of really interesting things. Like, am I falling to this human bias, right? Am I considering this mental model that I did not consider? Or am I inspired in some way by oblique strategies? And so anyways, it's a technique is to use this type of card randomization technique. Could be very effective. The next thing is when we talk about just the concept of how we make decisions as product people, right? Again, I believe that we think, if we have appropriate feedback mechanisms, if we are moving rapidly and iteratively, our decisions actually mean a lot less in the moment that we're making them. And what's more important in some ways is actually just making any decision. And so I do keep a magic 8 ball on my desk, probably more out of satire than anything. But what I have done when working with more junior PMs is if there's some type of issue where they're getting paralysis of being able to make a decision, there's a couple good decisions. I will basically instruct them to do this. I'll say, 1, I want you to create a list of all the options. And usually people fall into this bias that it's one of two things, black and white, right? And so if it's one of those two things, you could flip a coin. But I don't think that's as valuable because there's always multiple options. So the example that I had read somewhere around decision making in this really, really dry textbook was, if you were going to decide to buy a record player or not, right? You could decide to either buy the record player or not, right? That seems like 2 options, but there's actually more. There is that you could buy this brand new record player, or you could buy a used record player and some records. You could borrow a record player from someone to see if you even like it. You could buy a CD player. Those are all options, depending on what your objective is, right? Or if it's just I want to listen to good music. It could be Spotify. And so what I have them do is I have them try to write out as many ideas as possible, usually up to 6, and then I have them roll a dice. And there are 2 things that come out of this. 1, there's probably some gut feeling that if it wasn't the one that you actually thought was the best decision, that you feel some longing towards it. It's the same thing that when you flip a coin up in the air, your gut tells you what you think is the right decision at that point. But then, going forward and saying, okay, well, let's make this as a decision now, but with the ability to change it later. And I do wonder, like, how many of these decisions, like, especially if we believe that product management is about lots of steering adjustments, then it's thousands of decisions, right? It's not one decision. And so if that's the case, then a little bit of randomness may actually help you explore more. And so that's randomness, right? Like, I think randomness helps us get away from a lot of these constraints in a way that even our biases about biases will hold us back sometimes. And so the last thing that I want to talk about is really this idea of what's missing, and that's compassion, right? One of the things that I've found, at least when dealing with adversarial models, and this is very much the case when I'm thinking about competitiveness, is that if you really understand your competitor, I think in Ender's Game, he talks about this, the book, it's fiction, but for him, when he really knows his opponent, he loves them. Right? And the reason why is that your opponent in that moment, you understand all of the reasons why they are the way that they are. And I think when we talk about adversarial thinking, we need to be more compassionate, not only towards, we should always be compassionate towards everybody in the world, but we need to be more compassionate, especially to our teams and to ourselves. And so this is, a great quote by Jerry Colonna, who runs a podcast. He was at XVC in New York, and then now runs this podcast where he gets all of his founders to cry during the podcast. But genuine acts of compassion and compassionate leadership fosters the ability to withstand forces that cause burnout, right? And so that is the issue, is that adversarial thinking, and this is something that comes from people that do professional red teaming, is that you get burnt out from it from at a certain point. And so I think what we need to be able to be effective product people is compassion, because if we're constantly questioning everything and everything on the team, we will cause some real issues with ourselves. And so I don't know, that's like a piece of this that I think is always missing. So in closing, there's really 3 ways to remove constraints. And I think there's, plus one, right? So red teaming, how do you think like an adversary or a competitor? How do you understand other people's points of context? Feedback loops, which is how do you, once, with these assumptions that you maybe have about the world, how do you understand, how do you get feedback about those assumptions? And then randomness, how do you break out of these constraint sets that we have to be able to do it in a way that even is constraining based on biases about biases? And then last, how are we compassionate? And so I have like a piece of homework that I would like everybody to do. And I'd love to hear from you via email or the product mentor or the product group Slack. But like next time you have to make a decision, try one of these adversarial methods, right? So try to make a decision how your competitor would make it, not why, not what they would make, right? But how they would actually do that process. What would they take into consideration? I want you to consider what a bad decision would be. I want you to consider a random decision, and then I want you to consider what would be the compassionate decision for you, your team, and your customers. And I'll leave you with 2 quotes. So Sun Tzu, is really the original strategist, and so victorious warriors win first and then go to war, while defeated warriors go to war first and then seek to win, right? If you can in some way help play out these adversarial situations, you'll do a much better job when you actually meet the competition out in the playing field. And sometimes competition is not actually another entity. Sometimes it's just disinterest, right? People not caring about your product. And then last, my favorite quote, which is by Mike Tyson, is that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so, try to get punched in the mouth a few times before you go out and try to execute your plan. And so thank you very much. All of the resources available here. I'll post that on the Slack, and I think we'll get it everywhere else as well. So thank you.
Excellent. Thank you to our speaker, Chris. This was an awesome conversation on adversarial models and product and all kinds of things. I think I just ordered some of those cards that you just
Cool. I feel like I should get like some type of finder's fee from them, because they're not cheap cards either. But you can actually, I have it's an app that you can get that's just called Oblique Strategies, and it's free. And it will cycle through them as well. So if you really don't want to spend the $50-something for this, it's a very nice set of cards, by the way, but it's very interesting. So we have them in both the New York and LA offices at Philosophy to use them.
The box looked nice. So
it does. It's very nice.
And as always, and as also Chris mentioned, the presentation will be posted on our SlideShare channel. And also a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, to everyone else who joined us today in the Product Mentor. And also don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like today's speaker, Chris, to product people of all sorts all around the world, please visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free for all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all of that said, thanks everyone, and bye. All right, now we're starting the next one with Nis in 3 minutes. So people need to stretch their legs, do some jumping jacks, drink a Red Bull or other beverage. Feel free. Matthew's taking us for a walk. I like that. How you doing, Nis?
I have to plug in before my computer dies.
Doing all right. Sound check, 1, 2.
Yep, 3, 4.
Great talk, Chris.
Yeah. He always gives me new things I need to look at. Or
you need to create like an Amazon shopping list.
Exactly. I feel like I'm not. I am referencing so many like books and things, but anyways, I mean, I think what it just comes down to too is that we we build all this on the shoulders of giants, right? Like that's really what this is. Everything that I learn, it's just about trying to dig a little bit deeper into the past, right? There's no new stories.
I had these cards called mental notes. Those were my favorite. Those actually I used quite a bit. I hadn't realized so many different things were creating cards now.
Well, and that's the thing is, like, I think this is related to the Checklist Manifesto, which is probably a book that only needed to be an article. But like that idea of how you build checklists for things is really, like, it's related to this randomness, right? Like it's things that you have to do. And so for things that are very deterministic, it's more like checklists. For things where you're trying to explore, it's more like random deck of cards, I guess.
Yep.
Chris, do you read a lot of Nassim Taleb or not?
I do, yeah. I mean, I love his books. I love his ideas in his books. He has a very assaulting writing style, and then I hate his Twitter, but I'm still following him for some reason. Like, sure. He's definitely one of those people where it's like you love what he does. I love what he does, but I hate him as a person, I think. So.
That's understandable.
But yeah, what do you think? I mean, have you read a lot of his books? Or?
Yeah, I'm a big fan. His Twitter is definitely more controversial.
Totally. But yeah, I mean, like the last one I read was Anti-Fragile, and I haven't read the new one.
Skin in the Game.
Yeah. But I mean, I agree with him. Like he's talking about, kind of the way things operate, I guess, like, but really operate rather than the way we say they operate, which is, again, assumptions, fake models of the world, things like that.
Look at that book too.
Yeah, and I thought it was good. Did you like Skin in the Game? I read kind of like a couple of the chapters when he was posting them online.
Yeah, on Medium. I mean, you get the gist of it through Medium, but the book still adds a lot, and it's I think it's his shortest book by far. So it's
well, he's been writing the same book over and over again, just with like more details since.
Well, it's going micro from macro. Yeah,
exactly.
Now I'm just convinced you guys are getting a percentage.
Yeah, you should read all of his books: Fooled by Randomness, Black Swan, Anti-Fragile. There's a book in between, I think, too, but I'm not sure.
Book of Procrustes, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, or Bed of Procrustes. But no, he came to New York a couple months ago, so
cool.
I didn't wait in line to get it signed, though. He had like a huge fan club.
He does a lot of talks with the Complexity Institute if you ever wanted to like hear a talk by him, but it's super expensive. It's like $5,000 for 2 days or something like that. So
yeah, you get like a risk management certificate.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, we're gonna get going. You're good? Your goodness?
Yeah.
I should say that faster. Your goodness.
You do that with almost any word.
I didn't notice that until just now.
Yeah.
The possibilities. All right, everyone, remember to leave yourself muted, leave your video on as we're about to get started one more time. Let's see. Hey, and I'm not coughing. I just jinxed myself. All right. Here we go, folks. It's Sunday, August 12th, 2018, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Nis Frome, co-founder over at Alpha. He'll be leading a talk today on Your Hypotheses Are Probably Wrong. So let me just quickly explain the format for those of you who might be just joining us. This is the people that you see speaking, the people you see participating, are mentors and mentees within the current session of the Product Mentor Program, which takes place all around the world, where we pair up mentors and mentees to help make better product people and hopefully some better product decisions and better products along the way as well. And let's just, we're going to do some quick introductions. I'm going to go around the room in the order that the people are on the bottom of my screen, at least. When I call on you, who's your name? Are you a mentor or mentee? Where are you? If you want to add anything else, a little bit about yourself, feel free. I'm going to start with the person closest to me, and then I'll tell everyone a little bit more about how to participate in the chat. But let me start with Nis.
You'll hear a lot about me momentarily, so I won't go into too much detail now. And just one nuance, I did switch the title to Your Assumptions Are Probably Wrong. Hypotheses probably can't be wrong. So there you go.
Awesome. Let's go over to oh man, Mirzi. Oh geez, help me with your name, please, one more time.
Mirzia.
Oh my gosh, it's so much easier than I thought. I promise you, I will get your name correctly.
That's all right. Yeah.
Take it away.
Yeah. So hi everyone. I'm Marzia. I'm a mentee in the program, and I'm working with Joni, and I'm based in New York.
Excellent. And let's go over to Matthew.
Hey everyone, I'm Matt or Matthew. I am a mentee in the program right now, based in the suburbs of New York, soon to be in New York, and my mentor is Sud Kaushik.
Excellent. Magdalene?
Hi everyone, my name is Magdalene. I am a mentee. I'm located in San Francisco, and my mentor is Andrew.
Excellent. And Joni?
Hi, everyone. I'm Joni. I'm a mentor. I'm working with Marzia, and I am a software product management consultant, and I've been working in the digital music space for about 20 years now.
Hannah?
Hey everyone, I'm a product manager at Cordium, a financial services company. I'm a mentee in the program, and my mentor is Patrick Hoffman, and I'm located in New York City.
Chris?
Hi, I'm Chris Butler. I'm Director of AI for Philosophy, but previously Director of Product Strategy. And yeah, I have 18 years of product management experience, and I definitely appreciate the pedantry of the revision of the talk name. So thank you.
Andrew?
I'm Andrew Shu, mentor and based in New York. Currently product manager at Vega Factor, where we help large organizations build high-performing cultures. I've got around 70 years of experience, mostly fintech.
Excellent. And Alan?
Hello, everyone. My name is Alan, product manager at Modus Create, digital design company agency located in Cluj-Napoca, Romania. I'm a mentee. My mentor is Chris.
And I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. So as the talk goes on, as Nis gives his talk about all these things that are probably wrong, feel free to jump in with your questions. The way you jump in with your questions, you post your questions to the live chat, either on YouTube, or you go to theproductmentor.com/live, and along the bottom of your screen, you can also post your questions and participate in the chat there as well. As you post the questions, as they come in, I'll find good moments to interrupt Nis and ask him the questions or get the questions answered for you. If they're more general questions, what is product management? Why am I here? And all those questions of life, I will still pass those along to Nis, but I'll just save the more general things for the end of the talk. With all of that said, let's go hand it over to Nis to learn about today's talk.
Great, thank you, Jeremy. Hi, everyone. I'm Nis Frome. I hope you're enjoying the weekend, and thanks for tuning in. So this is my 6th talk now with the Product Mentor, and while I do really enjoy giving them, I also appreciate the thoughtful questions even more. So while this is not an interactive talk, does have some specific opportunities to pose questions to Jeremy. So I look forward to hearing those when he brings them up. So I'm going to cover a topic that is relevant both in your professional and personal lives, particularly as product managers. And that's most people recognize a simple truth when it comes to everyone else, that everyone else's assumptions are usually wrong. And I'm here to tell you that yours and even my assumptions are also usually wrong as well. So a quick word about me for context. I co-founded a company called Alpha. It's an on-demand insights platform for teams to make data-driven decisions about users, products, and new markets. And teams at about 1/3 of the Fortune 100 use our platform to essentially test their assumptions. So what I'm going to share is a lot of the takeaways from what I've seen when product teams test their assumptions. And you can find more insights around testing assumptions on 2 of our online channels you may already be familiar with. Our podcast is This is Product Management, which has more than 150 episodes. Besides Jeremy's episode and Chris Butler, well, I'll get to Chris Butler's article in a second. Be sure to check out High Impact Experimentation with Holly Hester Riley and Infusing Startup Culture with Alex Gruber. And then we have a Medium publication where Chris Butler, who just talked, has published several times. and that has articles and stories every single day. So I wrote an article there a couple years ago as well about what we learned from the first 2,000 experiments run on our platform. And since then, there have been about 10,000. So this talk is really going to encompass some of those more recent lessons. So the objective, again, is really to learn why, when, and how effective product managers de-risk assumptions and inform decisions. This often isn't easy or intuitive and can take a lot of practice to get used to building the right habits, but I'll provide some common scenarios and examples to get you started. So I think really the hardest part about testing your assumptions is the paradoxical nature of product management. And what I mean by that is that really the more you know, kind of the closer you are to users, the smarter, the more empathic you are, the more at risk you sometimes are of overlooking something you don't know. So of not realizing what's an assumption versus an evidence-based kind of decision. And so we'll talk a little bit later about the importance of intuition, because I do think intuition and empathy and kind of developing that over time is really important and plays an important role as a product manager. But I often find just, again, that product managers who are really close or really far from users make mistakes the most, while those in the middle practice what I call like the most reasonable caution. So no matter how smart or empathic you are, you're really at risk. And here's why, and I want to be clear that none of these are your fault. They're really just byproducts of the world we live in today, of a really fast-moving world with lots of competition and lots of different alternatives to your solution. So here's some of the most common reasons I see that assumptions are wrong, especially from teams that have been using our platform and running tests. These are usually some of the first things they learn, even when they're super empathic, even when they really think they know users well. So again, building products is just really hard, and consumers are a very difficult bunch. We all, of course, are consumers in many aspects of our lives, but as product people, it's important to recognize that as well. So the most common reasons I see are that you're directionally you're directionally correct in knowing what users want, but you're using the wrong messaging and insider jargon, so they don't really understand what you're saying. So I see this a lot in financial services and healthcare companies, where like a consumer website will say something like EMR, an electronic medical record. And if you ask, the healthcare product team, they'll say, no, of course users know what that means. When we ask them, they say yes. And so like, because most people aren't going to tell you like, no, I don't know what the acronym means. They'll just say yes. But if you actually, just ask them, well, what does it stand for? You'll get all sorts of different responses and realize that you may be solving a real problem for them, but you're confusing them all along the way. So I see insider jargon is probably the first and most common assumption that proves to be falsely widely understood. So that's something I think product teams, especially in kind of really technical industries, healthcare, financial services, learn really quickly. Another is that your assumptions were right at some point, but now they're wrong. And it's not because of anything you've done. It's not because of anything consumers have done. It's, just like some secular change that happened from a third party. So like an example of this would be about a year and a half ago, a lot of banks were testing on our platform to do facial login, to be able to log in, through a mobile app with your face, so you don't have to type in a password every time. And people thought it was like a laughable concept. Consumers thought it was a laughable concept. They said that, how could that be secure? What if someone puts a picture of my face in front? I don't want to do that. That's weird. I don't want you seeing me every time I have to log in, right? And so banks would just abandon this concept, saying like, okay, people don't trust facial login. But then, of course, at the end of 2017, Apple announced the iPhone 10 with Face ID, where they showed how it was way more secure in theory, and how you can now log into apps with Face ID. And then all of a sudden, consumers became overwhelmingly comfortable with it, right? So, and that's just another vendor that's not even in banking coming with this new technology, and all the assumptions that used to be right are now wrong. And so these things that you believe to be true were literally true until like a given day in history. So another assumption, another reason why assumptions turn out to be wrong is that you had all the data and it pointed in one direction because you didn't think another direction was even plausible. I know Chris talked about this on his recent talk, that there's usually more than one choice. And even if it seems there's only one choice, there's usually alternatives you haven't thought about. So this happens a lot when you do upfront research, where you collect all this data and then you're going to go into this build mode for whatever 3 to 9 months, right? You do all this upfront research and it all leads to you thinking only one choice can be possible. But if you were to iterate and ship regularly and test it with users, you would find that that's not the case. But you're making decisions for 6 months, all based on something upfront, some data point upfront. So I see that commonly happen. And then the fourth reason assumptions are often wrong is that your assumption is actually right and you hit the nail on the head. It's just the wrong nail. So your audience isn't who you think they are. And I find that this misalignment happens a lot between marketing and product, where products might be solving problems for early adopters and marketing is going out to like a broader market for whom like the pain points might not be so acute. So you're talking about two different audiences. So you're both in a sense right. Like the product team, you as a product manager is right, and the marketing team is right. You're just talking about two different audiences. So those are 4 of the most common reasons I see assumptions being wrong. There are many others, but that gives you at least some area to think about, where your assumptions might be wrong. So I talked earlier about consumers being a difficult bunch. And I think that the first step to really fixing these problems is recognizing why they happen. So I really do encourage every product manager and really anyone who works in business to read every Amazon shareholder letter. And this is a quote from the last one, and I really think it's a gem. And Jeff Bezos, the CEO and founder of Amazon, says, "One thing I love about customers is that they're divinely discontent. Their expectations are never static. They go up. It's human nature. You cannot rest on your laurels in this world. Customers won't have it." And so I think that's a really important lesson in all of product management. And fortunately, there's a depiction for this. If you don't also read Ben Thompson and subscribe to his newsletter, Stratechery, I really encourage you to. And he shows this in 2 simple charts. The first is how most companies perceive reality, in that there is some ideal, perfect user experience. And when he says user experience, he doesn't just mean like the design or the actual visual elements. He's talking about like the whole value, all the features, the entire kind of offering. And so a lot of companies see this as like, we collected some data points about consumers. We know how they behave. Now we just have to build and solve all those problems, right? And that's how most companies perceive reality. But what Jeff Bezos is saying, and what Ben Thompson very simply illustrated, is that you won't ever catch up because it's always changing. It's in flux. And the way to solve this problem is to recognize why it happens, right? So it's not solvable. That's the way you solve it. And so if you view the perfect user experience as a constantly changing vector, then it makes it much more realistic that you'll get closer to it, or that you'll have a good user experience. So I think it's really important, again, with assumptions, to realize that assumption is right at a given point in time, or can be proven right at a given point in time, but it could be wrong the very next day, or it could be wrong for any number of reasons. And it's really important to recognize that, again, your assumptions are probably wrong, which is the name of the talk. So it's not just product teams that make wrong assumptions. I noted how I really think this is an important concept for your professional and personal lives. So by no means are product teams the only ones that make these mistakes. And again, I'm not going to come at this from a fake news angle by any means, but I think it's important to recognize that false assumptions are everywhere and presented to us as facts, when often they're the opinion of an expert or based on what a few people say on Twitter. So a couple examples here is there were a bunch of articles when Facebook was having all the problems with data and privacy and Cambridge Analytica, and how easy it would be for just Facebook to charge everyone a small fee and then they could get rid of ads, right? And like the math makes so much sense. It's $1.65 per month, and then we wouldn't have to have ads on Facebook. They'd make the same amount of money, right? Simple, easily solvable. Or that when all the companies were going on their apology tours, when you were seeing on on TV, Uber's apology ads, Wells Fargo's apology ads, Facebook's apology ads. I think there were several other companies as well. And one professor at NYU said they thought Facebook's apology ad was more effective, right? And just based on some emotional appeal, right? And then Uber and Lyft, this kind of notion that Uber and Lyft are really dangerous, given all the recent events and the drivers assaulting people and all the statistics there, saying that those are really, they've led to controversies and they're potentially dangerous for consumers. So the thing is that all of these articles and these paragraphs are assumptions about consumers, which means, one, they're probably wrong, and also that they're testable, right? And so that's kind of the crux of this talk here, is that assumptions are testable. And they're testable at given points in time and over time. So that's precisely what I do and what we do at Alpha. So I spend a lot of time working with reporters and publications like Axios, Business Insider, Quartz, and others to inform stories with user insight. So I work with reporters who feel that the headlines out there and the articles out there are based on a few tweets or a couple expert opinions, and they're actually interested and they're skeptical, and they say, well, we want to tell a data-driven story. So to follow up on some of the headlines on the page before, we found that when users were shown a prototype of a Facebook offer, so they were scrolling through Facebook and then an offer pops up where they could use Facebook without ads for $1 a month, almost none clicked to pay. No one was interested. People said in open-ended responses and recording their video that they don't really mind the ads. Like, most people don't care. And even if it meant losing Facebook altogether, even if it meant like you pay this $1 or you're off of Facebook, most people were just indifferent. So most people are okay with ads and really just expect their data to be sold. They get that is the agreement. They understand that they are the product that Facebook sells. Another common theme, I don't think this was on the slide before, but a common theme has been that Amazon is going to take over all of healthcare, and consumers love Amazon. And we found that that is true, that they love them in a technology context, but not necessarily in a healthcare context. So we tested an email from your personal doctor inviting you to sync your health data with Amazon, and then Amazon could make all sorts of improvements to your healthcare. So they could recommend products based on your weight, your size, apps based on your goals, and all different things like that. And people who said that they trusted Amazon way more than like Facebook, for example, were like, whoa. I don't trust them more than Aetna in a healthcare context. They're like, that's a totally different spectrum. And so just all these things that are seemingly obvious that people want all these services from Amazon, Amazon may have to earn that trust in those contexts. So something to consider. And then I didn't show it here, but we also tested all the apology ads on consumers. And actually Uber performed by far the best, because people blame drivers and not Uber for all the mistakes that happened. They didn't even understand why Uber was apologizing. Facebook did perform fine, at least better than Wells Fargo, but mostly because people don't expect Facebook to be moral anymore. So there was really nothing to forgive. So people said, I never really expected Facebook to be, protecting my privacy. So I don't have anything to forgive them for. Wells Fargo, though, did not perform very well. And then one more thing here was we tested Business Insider with Business Insider showing how Netflix would actually be fine without Disney. So many headlines showing that Disney pulling their content from Netflix could kill Netflix. But in reality, first of all, most people are not at all aware that Netflix is going to be losing Disney content. And second, when shown a prototype of Netflix with Disney content versus Netflix without Disney content, almost no one can tell the difference, because Netflix has spent the last couple of years investing so heavily in kids' content. So people could hardly tell anyway, and they've been investing in this for a long time. So just, someone tweeting that Netflix, they're going to stop using Netflix because of they're going to lose Disney content. It's just, it's one person tweet, it's one data point. It's not thousands of users giving feedback. So I want to go through a little exercise, a little thought exercise here, so I can show you how common it is for assumptions to be wrong. And so this is, again, not interactive, but, an opportunity to write something down and maybe post it to Jeremy. So you've seen all the news, and we just talked about it, that many Uber drivers have been accused of assault and other criminal activities. And in response to all the media coverage, Uber announced a bunch of new features that would let you call emergency services from the app and let your friends track where your car is on a trip, right? So take a moment to consider this. And if you have a sheet of paper or a note-taking app, just write down whether you think these features are smart and the solution to safety concerns. So I'll give you a minute here. And it's important that you document your assumptions and not just mentally, because we all have a tendency to say after the fact, once we're presented with the data, yeah, that's exactly what I thought, when it's very much not what we thought. So, and then we don't learn any lesson from it. So take a moment here and just, consider, has this helped Uber? Has this not helped Uber? Have the new safety features been a brilliant solution to all the safety concerns around Uber and Lyft? Well, Uber specifically. Cool. So let me go into the tests we did. So after Uber announced the feature set, but before they released it, we tested prototypes of it against people that have been in an Uber. I think it was in the last 90 days, but it was in a recent time frame. So of the users we tested against, first, before responding to the prototype, men felt safer in Ubers than women. But the world, again, isn't a series of binary choices. We almost always have alternatives. So when you compare Uber to a taxi, women actually feel comparatively safer in Uber than men. So I think that's really interesting to think about when when considering this. Is that, I don't think I have that chart here, but I can post that after, was that you have these headlines claiming that people feel unsafe in Uber, but those headlines fail to provide the comparison, which is that people feel even less safe in a taxi. So these headlines are potentially pressuring people to take alternatives that they're even less safe with. So that's not to say that Uber doesn't have its problems and that they shouldn't address these problems. It's just to consider that in the world, the alternative is not you drive your own car, especially in a city like New York. The alternative is perhaps you take a taxi, and that may be even less safe, or at least what people perceive to be less safe. And then after users went through a prototype of Uber's announced feature set, a large segment said that there were times in the past that they would have used such safety features. So people did, through the prototype say, yeah, this is something I can think of a time I would have used this. And then we did kind of the post-launch here. Oh, and here's the chart in general. Which do you feel safer with, showing that women actually comparatively feel safer, at least in the users we tested against. So post-launch results is that reality is a lot more nuanced than a simple headline. So remember how large segments said they would use these safety features? In the month since the features were out, a decent segment of women used the friend notification feature, but almost no one contacted emergency services. Like very, very few people called 911 or whatever emergency services Uber gives them access to through the app. They did, though, notify friends where their car was. So I think kind of the takeaway here is that my initial assumption was flawed in its framing, right? Because it assumed that there were widespread problems to fix, when in reality, people already felt safer in an Uber. That being said, though, I think the feature set does seem to create the right perception, a more safe perception, and that Uber takes safety seriously. And that can be really important for a lot of people. And I know they've also done more around background checks and promoting that sort of safety as well. So overall, I think they've taken the right approach, or at least from a user insights perspective. I can't say from their business perspective. It seems they've taken the right approach. But the notion that people were feeling overwhelmingly unsafe in Uber was a flawed notion to begin with. So overall, I think there are two primary factors when considering whether or not to test an assumption and how to test the assumption. Again, these are really just simple rules of thumb and have to be contextualized to your product, your team, your workflows, your organization, your industry. But think about, broadly speaking, decision reversibility and the cost of being wrong. So if the decision you have to make is easily reversible and costs nothing to be wrong, just go for it. You can use the magic 8-ball as Chris suggests, or a coin flip, or a roll the dice, just ship it and iterate. But if you can't reverse your decision, I think it's wise to test a bunch of alternatives to figure out the optimal approach. And if the cost of being wrong is high, I would recommend testing your one assumption extensively to make sure it's not wrong and you're not going to cost a lot of money. If the decision is both irreversible and costs a lot to be wrong, and I question how many decisions in software product management are really like that, but let's say you come across one, test it and alternatives extensively. And then earlier in the talk, I mentioned kind of the paradox of competency when it comes to product management, about the closer you are to your users, the more confident you are in decisions. and the more likely you are to fall for an assumption trap. I do think, though, that intuition serves some very useful purposes as long as you are humble and don't let your ego get in the way. So let me talk through a couple of those ways I think intuition is really important and powerful as a product manager. So first, there are some things you just simply can't test or that are just very difficult to test. For example, imagine that consumers are really influenced by, headlines or network effects and social pressure. Like you're building a product where most people will hear about it from a friend. Like, how do you test them hearing about it from a friend? That can be kind of difficult. So those can be tough to simulate in an experiment. But if you have intuition, you can get a sense of whether your next feature launch will be covered positively in the press, like TechCrunch. If you've been at this company for 2-3 years, you get a sense of, how reviews go, whether something will be covered positively. Maybe you can even talk to some reporters beforehand and get a sense of what they think of it. And whether your users will recommend it to colleagues based on past experiences. So you have a better sense of where the market is likely headed and how your competitors may approach the future. So that's really important from an intuition standpoint, being able to foresee potential customer expectations. Intuition also helps you to prioritize which experiments to run first, using a framework like I had on the slide before, or your own that works well for you. Your organization, your team has really limited resources, and your intuition of having worked in the organization really helps you allocate them efficiently, and knowing, what kind of roadblocks you're going to run into, what sort of, just bottlenecks and other issues you should prioritize. And then last, I find that intuition helps you just notice patterns in the data and results much faster. So you have to spend less time per experiment to learn. You don't have to pore over the data as if it's your first time doing it every time, especially if you run some sort of recurring test. You can kind of pick up on the patterns much, much faster. So intuition really is important and does serve a huge purpose. But again, just be careful of not recognizing when you do have an assumption and when intuition is maybe blinding you from recognizing that. So that's my talk. I hope by now you can appreciate why assumptions are often wrong and how to be an effective product manager in light of that. I urge you to consider your next few sprints and which major untested assumptions may be baked into decisions your team has to make, because it's time to consider the risks of being wrong.
Awesome. That was great. That was really great. And thank you again to our speaker, Nis Frome, for today's discussion on your assumptions are probably wrong, co-founder over at Alpha. And as always, the presentation will be posted on our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and to everyone else who joined us today and the Product Mentor. And don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like today's speaker, Nis, the product people of all sorts, please visit theproductmentor.com. And sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all that said, thank you guys for joining us. Bye. All right. The next one starts in 29 minutes. All right. There were no questions for Nis. I was so surprised.
Everyone's assumptions are always right.
I don't know. It sounds like an assumption. And thus the circle begins or ends, continues. Cool. Thanks, folks. So everyone stick around. I'm going to stretch my legs a little bit. People who are joining us, watching us, feel free to post some questions in the chat. I'll try to get some of those answered as soon as I walk back to my computer. But I'm going to take this early opportunity to stretch, maybe even eat something today. I don't know, maybe. See you guys in a little bit. Hi, everybody. We're going to get started in just a moment. Everyone should be turning their videos on, keeping themselves muted. Andrew, you good?
Set.
Awesome.
It's like this rain might have warmed it up for a little bit.
Yeah, it looks sunny out.
Yeah.
Yesterday was going to be the day it was going out, and then we tried to get out of the house 3 times. The last time, I even got my son into the stroller, and every time we were just about to leave, the rain started up again.
Yeah.
And it would be like, hey, it's not raining, let's go out. And then we'd all get ready, and it's like, oh, well, we're not going out.
Yeah.
So hopefully, after this, I actually go into the outer world today.
That's what I'm hoping to. Hopefully it sticks around.
All right. We get started in 3 minutes. Where is everybody? I see a horse and 3 Smurfs. Hello. Is there anybody out there? 1. Yay. Yay.
Hello. We're all here.
2 more. Got this cough from my son. It's killing me today.
That cough drop he's talking about.
Yeah. I don't have any. That's not that. I can go for about a minute or 2. But not much more than that. Magdalene, Matthew, you're in Smurf mode. That's what I'm calling it. I want credit. Oh no, Hannah turned blue. So those viewers who are joining us, you can post your questions to live chat, starting as soon as now or as late as later. We're going to get started in about 60 seconds. Assuming, I got Matthew. Man, I can only have 2 at a time? Everyone's messing with me, taking turns. So Magdalene and Hannah, we're just waiting on you guys, and then we're going to get started. Yay! We had Hannah. Yay! All right. Andrew, remember to leave yourself muted until I call on you. And I'll take one last drink.
I have a reminder for ruler of all the world.
Now I have to wait for my Google Home to stop talking.
How do you wait?
You just turned mine on.
Sorry. I didn't tell it to sing anything. Oh, boy. That's what I should do. I should mess with everybody. Hey, Alexa. Anything? No? All right. Oh, my God. If I start drinking the Red Bull, you know I'm in trouble. All right, just as a reminder, definitely you want to ask questions of the mentor and post them to the live chat. For people in the program, you prefix them with MM. Everyone else, do not do that. And we're going to get started now. Oh, my God. All right. It's Sunday, April 12th, 2018, and this is the Product Mentor Talk. Today we're joined by one of our mentors, Andrew Shu, who's going to lead a talk on the only 3 things you should focus on. Can't wait to find out what they are. So let me just briefly explain the format for those of you who might be just joining us. This is a Product Mentor program. The people you see in the room are mentors and mentees within the current session of the Product Mentor. We've been going for around 5 years now. We're all around the world. And this is the people you see in the room are mentors and mentees. Everyone else, feel free to post your questions to the live chat. I'm gonna have to edit that. Please post your questions to the live chat. We're gonna quickly go around the room with some introductions. Let me start with the person closest to me, and that's Merzia.
Hi, everyone. I'm Merzia, and I am a mentee with the Product Mentor Group.
Excellent. And let's go to Matthew.
Hey everyone, my name is Matthew. I'm a mentee with the Product Group based in the New York area.
Magdalene.
Hi everyone, I'm Magdalene. I am a mentee and I'm located in San Francisco.
Excellent. And Hannah.
Hey everyone, I'm a product manager at Cordium in New York City. I'm a mentee in the program and my mentor.
Excellent. And we'll go over to Andrew for a quick intro.
I am Andrew Shu. I'm a mentor in the program based in New York, working at Vega Factor, where I help companies build better cultures. And I will jump into more details about my history in the talk.
Excellent. And I am Jeremy Horn, aka the Product Guy, and I'll be moderating here today. So if you can go over to theproductmentor.com/live. On the top of the screen, you'll see the video. On the bottom, you'll see the live chat. You can chat. You can post questions, comments. I'll get those questions to our mentor in fairly real time. I wait for a good moment to interrupt him. As long as it's topically related, I'll jump in. The more general things, what is product management? What is the meaning of life? Those questions I will actually still ask him if you ask. But I'll hold on to those till the end of the talk. But with all of that said, let's get it going. Let me hand it over to Andrew and to begin today's talk on the only 3 things you should focus on. Take it away, Andrew. You're muted.
Thank you for that heads up. All right, so this talk is about when everything is in chaos. Just kind of 3 things I think are most important on that really kind of help me focus. A bit about me. In my past, I was an electrical engineer. And then in the past 7 years, I've worked as a product manager for a variety of startups in terms of making and managing a mobile app for personal finance that had around 800,000 active users, coordinated the launch of Google's material sign-in, and then also helped with launching a product that focused on home valuation. And currently I'm focused on working with large companies to help them build more effective cultures. So kind of a quick analogy. So in cooking, it's just something I noticed that I think 3 things to really focus on are the heat you're applying, how long you're applying it, and the space on the pan. Will really kind of let you play with and make the food that you're looking for. Another similarity is in project management. You know, when you've got a deadline, you're really working on being effective. The 3 things that you can change are, can you make your scope less? Can you change it? Can you add more people to the problem? Or can you find more time? And so those are 3 things to focus on within project management if you're trying to be more effective. And something that I've noticed is that when everything's getting pretty crazy, the 3 things that I focus on to really make sure that I'm focused and delivering impact are customers, for sure, number 1, and then your team, making sure that you're framing the problem well and empowering them, and then yourself. So to get started, what could chaos be? How about a zombie apocalypse? So you're a product manager at Zombie Corp, and you have 2 customers that you know about, Transylvania in the top and Pegasus at the bottom. All right, so the focus number 1, so it's obviously pretty chaotic. You've got to figure out what to get your team to deliver. and make sure that you're on time and helping your customer. So the first focus is definitely your customer. So the question is really, okay, given what's happening, how do I really make sure that I'm still delivering customer impact? Because this is definitely always the #1 focus. And to do that, kind of got a couple things I always think about. So first off, do we really understand the customer, their needs, their deadlines, and their constraints? How soon do we need to deliver on these needs for us to be able to test these results and see how we're doing? And once we have that picture framed, I like to work backwards and figure out what's the first step that we need to do, what do we need to deliver, as well as who needs to then help me and work with me on making sure that we can deliver this. So jumping into that definition, let's get started with the customer needs, deadlines, and constraints. So we had 2 customers as we kind of framed out in the beginning. So the first is, let's say, landlocked, and they need a cure defense against the zombies. It's an army of 1,000 there, and we also need to worry about the morale. And the deadline is that they have 4 days until this zombie force arrives. And the constraints we have are, we can only send 1 solution a day. We can instantly communicate with them anytime. They have zombies we can test the solutions on. And we as a company, Zombie Corp, have 4 potential solutions. The other one, the floating castle, same needs, similar. So they need a cure defense. They need to keep morale up. And they're just 20 people that like comedy. And that will be explained more in the future. The deadline is 31 days until zombies arrive. And the constraints are, it takes 10 days to fly the solutions to them. We can still only send 1 at a time, instant communication, but they don't have any zombies to test on. And again, the same 4 solutions. So this is kind of like understanding for our customers what they really need, what our constraints are to deliver it to them, as well as their true deadlines. After understanding that, I think about, okay, so let's start looking at this timeline and work backwards. So if we think about it, so we had 4 solutions, and so customer 1, we really have 3 days before bad things are about to happen. And on top of that, we can do an experiment each day because they have zombies there. So you kind of put out a straw timeline defining, for customer 1, we've got 3 experiments before the kind of deadline and 3 days. For customer 2, we have, again, 3. They're not experiments though, because they don't have anything to test on. But again, 3 major blocks for us to kind of send them what they might need. Okay, so now we're looking at our known solution set. So as a client or as a company, we have 4 things that we think we can deliver to our customers. So 1 is just a pure cure. Let's say if scientists have been thinking about it, we have an idea that it may just solve the problem. And it does take an extra day to test though. So it gets there, takes a day to take effect. Let's find out if it works. Garlic, maybe it works, but it also can be used in food, which means that maybe for customer 1, for example, it's going to make the food tastier, it keeps morale up. We've got Bionic Jerry Seinfeld. He's pretty funny. We're hoping that might hold off the zombies, also keep up morale. And then sharp pointy things, swords, that also give you defense. Okay, so we have known solution set. We know our customers. So the thing now is I like to then straw model a solution before I start thinking about how to bring this all to the team. Because I've found that as you're working with a team, a lot is lost, right? So you want to kind of describe what's happening from many different angles. We want to be able to describe the customer who's there. We want to be able to describe their constraints, and we want to be able to kind of also have a solution. But when having all those facets explained to the team, I found really kind of give the team more and more clarity for when we get into the actual problem solving. So potential solution, looking at kind of trade-offs and constraints, is, so just you can kind of see how I'm thinking before I present it to a team. Let's say that, for the first customer, we definitely want to get their, we want to keep their morale up. So why not send them something that would bring up morale? It's many times the morale in an army is maintained through their stomach. So let's get them some more tasty food as well as a potential solution. From there, I think that we should, send the potential cure because we need to know it needs 1 day to be tested. So then by day 3, we'd actually know. Day 3, let's send the swords because no matter what, it'll provide some defense. And then finally, as the last solution, we'll send over Jerry. Thinking about it from the customer 2 standpoint, it's going to take 10 days to get there. We definitely want to make sure that we get all 3 experiments in. So we should send a solution immediately. Also looking at the fact that we're going to run all our tests already with customer 1, which means that by day 20, we'll already know for customer 2 what we need to send them. So let's just send customer 2 what's going to bring up morale. They like humor. Let's send Jerry. And by day 20, we'll already be pretty sure that we've got them covered. Okay, so now we've got the customer framed, we've got the constraints framed, and we have a potential solution set. That remains, or that brings up the final is, okay, now who needs to know, who do I need to kind of work with to make sure that we're bringing in as many creative problem solving as possible, and everybody has context that needs to kind of be aware of this and to solve the problem. So just like straw model for a company, for example, is, I definitely know I need to talk to engineering, I need to talk to design, I need to talk to, let's say we have a communication team that's kind of keeping up with our customers, make sure we keep the customers informed on the plan, getting feedback from them, and of course the business, let's say legal, et cetera, so that everyone's kind of up to date and aligned. And then looking at this, this is kind of the kickoff to, okay, who needs to be in this team, right? So we started with, so now we know the customer, we know their deadlines, we know what we need to get them. Now for the team, let's focus on them and see who do we need to take care of, who do we need to make sure has full context so we can start problem solving together. So focus number 2 kind of naturally leads into is the team. And so thinking through this, we probably need an engineer to design our solutions, designers of course as well, communication team to keep everyone updated, and I didn't put it, but maybe logistics to send it. And so let's kind of pull together that team. Okay, so now that we have the team, typically what I like to do to take care of it is, and it's always just how can I frame this problem as effectively as possible to them, and how can I frame the customer as effectively as possible, whether that's personas or exactly what's happening, what their circumstances are. I'm really trying to focus on that, and then facilitate a productive problem solving session. Once that problem solving session is complete, it's making sure that we have clear owners and expectations set. And then have the team rolling and taking action and adapting as things are changing. Okay, so let's jump into effectively kind of framing the problem and enabling this problem solving. So when I frame the problem, as I mentioned before, it kind of blends in. So it's customer context and then kind of the straw solution. And then finally, where are we today? And where do we need to go for the next delivery? And what's the impact of that kind of next delivery going to be? Okay, so we can go like, let's imagine that actually we're kicking off the meeting. We've got the important kind of team stakeholders and problem solvers in the room and ready. So what I always like to kick off with is the context, constraints, and then the state of tomorrow. So, I mean, we can skip or kind of looking at it. So it'd just be framing up as what we kind of did in the beginning. So, visa the customer, there's 1,000 people here. Their morale's okay. They've tried 5 solutions so far, nothing's worked. They're a bit worried, and they've got 4 days until the zombies arrive, and 1,000 people go through the constraints. And then where we really need to go is we need to effectively keep up morale as soon as possible, and then also send a cure that we can test for as effectively as possible. And the similar kind of situation for customer number 2. Go through the straw solution set. We've already kind of presented it. But again, just to kind of really make the context very clear and then enable the team to problem solve. So finally, so now that like the customer situation is clear and a potential solution is clear, which I found kind of helps facilitate ideas or complaints, I think about the facilitation as I kick it off with encouraging expansive problem solving. And so what this is now that we trust that our folks have the context they need and they have a clear view on the problem, it's just, hey, can we ideate for 15 minutes and there's no bad answers? And so this kind of changes people's mindsets because many times people are biased in kind of shooting down ideas, but there's a lot of strength in putting everything out there. So I'll encourage 15 minutes of ideation. And during this time, anyone can throw out ideas to how we can solve these problems more effectively or add in answers that none of us have thought about yet. And during that time, I'll list everything as I'm facilitating this problem solving. So we'll have everything written out. And once there's kind of a lull, then, okay, so we'll hit pause and we'll say, okay, now we're going to move into reductive problem solving mode, which is, okay, so given this entire feature set of potential solutions and all the context that we've had, what ideas do we think are best that we'd like to move in on? And so we might narrow it down to 3 or 4, have a debate about those 3 or 4, and then actually move into the actual solutions as well as the timeline. So if as we're kind of problem solving, let's say we land on 1 or 2 solutions, then it becomes like, okay, so let's kind of problem solve that, write it down, and at the end, we'll have a set of owners and define the expected outcomes. Okay, so after kind of that problem solving session has been done, in terms of kind of expansive and then the reductive problem solving, here's an example of kind of the output of that meeting. So we've got, okay, for each of the customers, we know the next kind of deliverable has been agreed upon for customer 1, and we know the deliverable that's been agreed upon for customer 2. And within that team, we've kind of started to logistically problem solve deadlines, timelines, and who's going to own what. So as an example, the owners coming out of this meeting might be, okay, for engineering, we've got V1 built by 2 p.m. today, design by 2 p.m. as well. Communications, we need to immediately convey this after this meeting, make sure that we're bringing back any facts that might complicate the situation, that might make things more complex that we haven't taken into account. Immediately follow up with the business in terms of strategy, in terms of vision, and then agree that we're going to deliver by 10 p.m., which means maybe we have a sync up at 6 p.m. Besides setting these owners and the specific tasks, also really important is to set expectations of what you think is going to happen. And these expectations serve kind of 2 purposes. Purpose 1 is that with folks with experience, they're going to be able to paint the world a bit more clearly so the team can roll with changes and concerns more effectively. So if they know leadership or people with experience think that it's just 60% confidence that this is going to solve a problem, it's going to provide them more resilience because they understand what could go wrong and kind of expectations. The other nice thing about expectations, and this actually is similar to what Nis was talking about in the last talk, is it clarifies our assumptions. So we have actually a measuring point. We assume that we have this % chance to be correct. And what this enables us is in the future, we can then critique our own kind of problem solving process and get better and better as a team. Anyways, okay, so those are expectations. So we've got now for each client in each product, we have owners, we have sync up times, we have deliveries, and then we've also conveyed those expectations.
So I want to just jump in. Got a question from Merzia. Take it away.
Yeah, so I was curious when you are going through the exercise of doing expansive problem solving and then moving into the reductive problem solving, what are some steps that you can take to ensure that when the team is picking out the best ideas, they aren't picking up the ones that are most popular or that was on the forefront of everyone's minds going into the meeting? Because I find like you go through this exercise, but you end up picking the one, people are still kind of thinking along the lines that they went into the meeting of. So getting them to kind of think of some of the maybe more creative, like bad ideas that were pulled out during the expansive problem solving part.
Yeah, no, definitely. So I think actually the most important part is the framing that we started with. And it depends on the audience in the room as well. But some people, they have a very good grasp. If you're continuously doing this, they understand your customer, they understand the problem. So it's moving the team's solutions always to addressing the customer's problem. So that's one exercise, which is, can we actually assume the customer's impact? And can we define it? Another is there's just a ton of different techniques that we can use to kind of debate the merits of the solutions chosen. Again, what's just funny is these previous conversations. So one is red teaming, right? So you can actually have a team that goes against the existing kind of solution set. Another really interesting methodology is whoever is actually debating the most, let's say there's 2 people that are really at ends with each other, actually have them debate each other's point. So they have to pitch the other side's pros and cons. That's another example. But the main things really are around customer impact. So, okay, that's great. Let's, we're debating these. And what do you think is going to change when we deliver this? And does it do it in the time frame allotted? And that's why that timeline and understanding the customer is really important. We might add in a third aspect, which is the company strategy as well. But at that point, it really depends on the team, as well as what the team members are willing. So, you know, some team members, they're very specialized. They're not going to have that overall picture. And hopefully kind of team dynamics have worked out. So you've worked together long enough that you can kind of work that out.
Cool. Keep the questions coming in to the productmentor.com/live or the live chat on YouTube. And with all that said, let me hand it back to Andrew to continue the talk.
All right, great. So we ended with, after the meeting, you know, we've got the owners, we've got expectations set, both so we can critique and so the team knows kind of what likely could happen. And that takes us to the final focus, which is yourself. So if the customer's taken care of, your team's taken care of, and I think everyone can see how this all kind of blends as well. And it's never sequential either. I do find that customer and timelines are the best way for me to prioritize and keep myself moving. But, you know, all three of these blend. So finally, we're on yourself. So for yourself, it's, you know, how do I really continue to make these complex, chaotic situations sustainable? And then how does my current work fit into my career in terms of my company now and maybe where I want to go? So just two parts to here. So you personally, and then your career. All right, so for you, just things I like to keep in mind is you can only do one thing at a time. You can maybe think about multiple things at a time, maybe not, but you can really only do one thing at a time. It's a great rule of thumb. This chaos is going to happen again, so let's kind of at least get your approach down on paper, or approach down just doing it once or twice so that you can take care of yourself, right? Because if you can't take care of yourself, you're really not going to be able to frame, problem solve, or do anything effectively for others. So normally, if it really is super bad, what I'll actually do to try and get myself in a good state to problem solve is many times I'll unplug, turn off notifications, move to a notebook, and even before maybe problem solving, sit still for 10 minutes, go for a walk, kind of just clear your brain, because yeah, there's a lot of things that you need to be doing, and let's make sure that you're focused on, or at least discovering or focused on the most important ones. After that, it's all about kind of prioritization. My favorite way to do this is to write down every single one of your thoughts and concerns if it really is a crazy time and you don't have clarity. After that, I really look for themes. I chunk up the work. So, okay, I see there's a set of concerns here. This is actually a set of constraints. These are customers. These are things that are not important actually because they just don't apply to the time frame given, et cetera, et cetera. And so then you start to get a set of those top problems and themes. From there, I will prioritize kind of like, okay, what are the three things that are in my control? What can I do now to start high-level solving? But most importantly, who can I pressure test this with? So even though I have my ideas, it's really important to see, you know, who can I connect with to test these ideas, both the prioritization and the ability to execute. So that's how I kind of clear my mind and make sure that I'm prioritizing on the most effective things. And finally, you know, get to solving. Again, that's why this blends with the customers and your team, because you're working down your list, but you're really looking at who are the cross-functional team members needed that have the responsibility, have the experience to help us move this forward, as well as can really help me give me clarity on, is my prioritization correct? Are we moving in the right direction? And then set up that team meeting. Okay, and finally, I think this is actually many times overlooked, but it is really important. It is like learning to talk about yourself, which is not fun, at least not for me, but this is one of those pieces. And I think it's important for people to at least look at this once a quarter. So your career and your performance review. So your performance review, can you explain your current performance review system? What criteria are you graded on? What is the review process? What's it like? And then can you actually mesh and explain how your current work fits into this review? So sample performance review systems, there's output-based, right? Like how many widgets have you made? There's rating-based. Many companies will have a different kind of rating system. And some are just friend-based. Does your boss like you? And it's important to kind of write out your assumptions and check like, do you understand your review system and are you optimizing against it? Ways to find out, ask HR, ask your boss, ask your colleagues, find previous metrics for success. You know, look for kind of those rating sheets. Some places have it, and just understand kind of, again, what you're going to be graded on. So finally, let's kind of do an example. And let's imagine that you're in a 360 review system, which means that every 6 months you're going to get reviewed by your reports, your peers, and your boss. And your last review was, hey, you need to show more ownership. So one way that you could move forward then is, okay, so for the current project, draft your statement. So let's do the statement. Okay, so, you know, it's crazy. There's freaking zombie apocalypse. We've never seen it before. I knew I had to show ownership. So I spoke with each customer and stakeholder, determine customer needs, customer constraints, and I created a straw model solution as well to make sure that I could drive that meeting effectively. I then set up and manage a cross-functional sprint to ideate and come up with a solution set attached. Once complete, we signed the ownership, and you know, we launched immediately day one. We ran into some issue day two, but we called the meeting. We were adaptive. We kind of problem solved again, and by day 3 for customer 1, we found the solution, and that also translated to customer 2, and everyone lived happily ever after. In the future, I'm super excited to kind of work with these 3 customers and our new Merman division. Right, so that's one potential way that you can do it. Another really important thing is that you then take this and review it. Don't just do it for yourself. Do it with a peer, right? Like help them do the same thing and kind of critique each other. It's going to make it a lot easier than you looking at your own work and iterating on your own, which is always actually quite tough. So with that, so in chaos next time, you know, you kind of use this blend, really focus on your customers. The impact to them is what really matters. It's going to help you prioritize. Next up, without your team, you're not going to prioritize as effectively as possible. You're not going to come up with better solutions, and you're not going to deliver. And finally, just make sure you take care of yourself, both in how you are problem solving, as well as your future career. That's it.
Outstanding. I want to thank our speaker, Andrew Hsu, for today's discussion of the only 3 things you should focus on in a chaotic world, one in which zombies inhabit and garlic will stop them. So thank you for that. And also, as always, the presentation will be posted to our SlideShare channel. And a big thank you from me, Jeremy Horn, the product guy, to everyone who joined us today and the product mentor. Also, don't forget, if you're interested in being a product mentor like today's speaker, Andrew, the product people of all sorts all around the world, visit theproductmentor.com and sign up today. And also, if you're looking to fill a new product job with a great product person, visit our very own free-for-all job board at theproductjobs.com. And with all of that said, thank you guys for joining us. It's been a great day, and I'll see you guys all next time. Bye.
Yeah.